She has nothing. He has everything. He buys her anyway, not to keep her, to make a point. The council wants a bloodline they can control. He gives them her. She has no bloodline worth controlling. She has no intention of being controlled. And he has no idea what he's just done to himself. What happens when the weapon you buy to win a war decides she won't be anyone's weapon? The great hall of Vethara Keep smelled of beeswax and old ambition. It always did on presentation days. The candles burned from morning, the rushes laid fresh, the long oak table at the council's center polished until it threw back the faces of the men who sat around it like a warning. 11 of them today. Elder Casson at the head, as always. His white hair swept back in that precise wave that cost him a quarter-hour every morning and told everyone in the room exactly how much he cared what they thought of him. The others arranged in descending importance like a diagram of their own hierarchy, each man's posture a performance of the rank he held. They were waiting for their king. The candidates waited too, in the antechamber, 5 of them, by the count that had reached Casson's desk 3 weeks prior. 5 women of appropriate bloodline, appropriate status, appropriate allegiances that the council had quietly negotiated over the preceding months. The process was not technically a purchase. Casson would have been careful to say. It was a betrothal arrangement, a recognition of mutual advantage, a consolidation of the pack's bloodline at a moment when the borders were soft and the southern territories restless, and what the Alpha King needed, whether or not he knew it, was a mate whose lineage would quiet the unrest in a single ceremony. He had said as much to Turn 3 times in the past season. Twice in formal council session and once over a meal that had grown cold while Casson made his case, and the king ate nothing and said less. The king's silence in Casson's experience meant something. He simply hadn't yet determined what. The doors opened. Alpha King Turn walked as though he owned the hall, which he did, and the land surrounding it, and the pack that filled it, and the air itself on cold mornings when it was thick with wood smoke and wolf musk, and the particular stillness that falls before a very large predator moves. He was 33 years old, and there was nothing soft about the fact. 3 years past the age when most alphas had already bred and cemented and secured their dynasties, and every one of those years was visible in the economy of how he moved. Not wasteful, not hurried. The broad set of his shoulders said he had never once needed to rush toward anything, because everything eventually came to him. His dark hair was pushed back from his face, with no particular care, and there was a thin crescent scar through his left eyebrow, old enough that it had gone silver, a relic of a border fight in his 19th year, that pulled the corner of that brow upward in something that looked perpetually close to a raised question. He sat at the head of the opposite end of the table from Casson. He did not greet anyone. "Shall we begin?" Casson said pleasantly. "I'm here," Turn said. "That's beginning." The elder's fingers did not move on the table, but something around his mouth did. "The candidates are prepared. I thought, if it pleased you, that we might receive them in order of bloodline rank, beginning with, 'Show me what you've arranged.'" It was not a question. Casson's smile held. Of course. They came in one by one, and Turn watched each of them with the same expression he would have given a map. Attentive, calculated, taking in what was there and what was not. The first was the daughter of the Eastern Border Alpha, dark-eyed, careful, her hands folded in front of her with the composed stillness of a woman who had been prepared for this room for years. The second was from a lesser-ranked pack, but brought trade alliance with the river settlements, brown-haired, pretty in the way that announced its own harmlessness. The third and fourth he barely tracked. The fifth he watched for the full length of her presentation, long enough that Casson allowed himself, privately, a small breath of relief, then Turn said, "No." Casson's relief evaporated. "My king." I said no to all 5. He stood. "Bring me the 6th. There is no 6th. Casson's voice was careful now. The list was prepared with 5 candidates, all of appropriate. There's a 6th. Turn's eyes moved along the table, touching each face in a way that felt less like looking and more like accounting. The girl you didn't add to the list. The one who came with the Thornfield tribute delegation and has been put up in the East Wing servants' quarters for the past 8 days, while you decided whether or not she was worth mentioning to me. The silence that followed was a particular kind. The kind that forms around a man who has just discovered his correspondence has been read. "She's low-born," Casson said, and then, smoothly, "Not a fit candidate for the king's consideration. We didn't wish to waste your time." "And yet here I am," Turn said, "with time to waste. Fetch her." The door to the East Wing storage room, not a servant's quarter, whatever the messenger had called it. A storage room with a pallet stuffed into the corner and a window that faced a wall. Opened without a knock. Ilka had been filing arrowheads. Not her arrowheads. She owned nothing here. Had arrived with 4 personal effects and all the particular pride of a woman who has decided that if she must be transported somewhere against her preferences, she will at minimum keep her hands busy. The Thornfield delegation had brought a supply crate of hunting equipment as part of the tribute. The arrowheads in it were milled by someone who didn't care how they flew, and they'd been sitting in a cloth bag without having seen the inside of a grinding stone in what looked like 2 seasons. It was appalling. She'd borrowed a whetstone from the kitchen boy who'd brought her supper and been correcting the situation ever since. She looked up when the door opened. She did not stand. The man in the doorway was not a servant. He wore no insignia. She'd learn later that Turn wore insignia the way he wore ceremony, which was only when he decided it served him. But there was something about the quality of his stillness that announced what he was more clearly than any badge of rank. The scar through his eyebrow, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes took the room and settled on her, not as an obstacle, but as a question. She couldn't have said why that was the word for it. It simply was. She set the arrowhead down on the pallet beside her, kept the whetstone in her hand. "You're the king," she said. "I am." He looked at the arrowheads arranged in a line beside her knee, back at her face. "Why are you doing that?" "Because they're bad," she said. "The fletch angles are also wrong, but I don't have the tools for that in here. You weren't asked to maintain the tribute stock. No one asked me not to." She held his gaze. "Are you going to tell me what you want? Or are you going to keep looking at me like I'm something you found on a map?" He stepped into the room. It wasn't large, and he made it smaller without apparent effort. Not by aggression, but by the simple physics of what he was. The wolf in him was not close to the surface. It was far beneath, the way deep water is far beneath ice, and she felt it anyway. The scent of him was pine resin and metal, and something older, something that should have made her want to step back and instead, made her hold still, the way you hold still when you're not sure if a sound is the wind or something else entirely. "I want to know your name," he said. "Ilka." She paused. "No pack name. I come from the Thornfield Commonlands. My father keeps bees." "I know." He crouched down to look at the arrowheads at her knee, not at her, at them. The correction of posture was so abrupt that for a moment she didn't know what to do with it. A king crouching in a storage room examining the tip of an arrow as if it actually interested him. "You've got 3 angles here. The flights out of the northern workshops come with too steep a bevel. Better for power, worse for distance." "I know," she said. "These are distance arrows," I corrected for it. He looked up at her then. That raised eyebrow scar made it look like he was perpetually on the edge of asking something he hadn't yet decided to say. "Who taught you?" "My father. Beekeepers don't generally teach arrowhead geometry." "Mine did," she said. "He taught me most things. He didn't have a son." Something moved in Turn's face. It was there and gone, too quick to name, the way a fish turns in shallow water, and you only catch the flash of its belly. He stood. "Come with me." "Where?" "The council is waiting." She stayed seated. I don't go places with people who haven't told me why. He looked at her for a moment, a long one. Then he said, I'm going to offer to take you under my protection as a mate candidate. The council will object to your bloodline. That's the point. You don't have to say yes. But if you say nothing, I'll take it as yes. So if you're going to say no, say it now. The room sat very quiet. Outside the wall window, a bird called twice and stopped. You're using me, she said. Not an accusation. An assessment, yes. She was 26 years old and had not survived her particular life by misreading what people wanted from her. She knew the exact weight of a transaction, the precise temperature of a thing offered for reasons other than kindness. His honesty was the first clean thing she'd encountered since arriving at this keep. It hit her somewhere beneath the sternum, where she kept the things she didn't show. She stood up, picked up the arrowhead she'd been working, tucked it into her belt without thinking, a habit, something to keep her hands from being empty. Then let's go, she said, before I reconsider. The council's silence when Tern walked her into the great hall had mass. She felt it on her skin like weather, 11 pairs of eyes, 11 measurements made simultaneously, each one finding her wanting in a specific way that she could read from the quality of their stillness. Cassen's mouth pressing flat. The man to his right, Aldrich, she'd learn, Lord of the Western River Territories, 23 years on the council, never a vote that didn't serve his own land, allowing himself one precise look at her clothes, which were her own clothes and not the presentation finery the 5 other women had been dressed in. She wore a linen shirt, her own leather vest, and boots that needed resoling. Her hair was down because she hadn't thought to pin it before the door opened. She still had the whetstone. She kept her chin level. My king, Cassen said, and his voice was a model of controlled pleasantness. I'm not certain I understand. I'm certain you do, Tern said. He stopped them at the center of the hall, 2 people standing in the space between the long table and the candled dais. And the geometry of it was deliberate. Ilka understood that much. He'd placed them where the council would have to look at her directly, at the same height as the men who sat in their carved chairs. Not approached, not presented. Placed. This is Ilka of the Thornfield Commonlands. I'm considering her for the mate selection process. The mate selection process, Aldrich said, requires a candidate of pack-born bloodline, as outlined in the Articles of Succession that this council, the Articles, Tern said, outline requirements I wrote and can revise. Continue. Aldrich did not continue. She has no rank, Cassen said. Gentle. Patient. The voice of a man who has practiced patience so long it has become its own form of force. No established territory. No bloodline documented with the pack registry. My king, the purpose of this selection is to strengthen our dynastic position, not to. I'm aware of the purpose, Tern said. I was there when you explained it. Several times. Cassen looked at Ilka then. It was a brief look, the kind that contains an entire decision. What are your qualifications, child? She was 26. She was nobody's child. She said, I file my own arrowheads. One of the councilmen, young, on the end she couldn't have said which territory, made a sound that might, in another context, have been a laugh. It was strangled immediately. Cassen's smile didn't waver. I see. Elder Cassen. Tern's voice was very even. I'm extending protection and consideration to Ilka of Thornfield for the duration of the mate selection period. She'll be housed in the keep's guest quarters, the East Hall, North rooms, with appropriate provisions. The council will be informed of any developments. He paused. I don't require your approval. No, Cassen said. You do not. A beat. Of course. She felt Tern's hand at her back, not gripping, not steering, barely there at all, the lightest possible pressure at the back of her left shoulder. She'd thought, in the moment before it happened, that she would resent any touch from him. She'd braced for resentment the way you brace for cold water. But his hand was warm, and the pressure was there and gone, and what she felt instead was more confusing. the specific sensation of being stood beside, which was not a thing she had expected from a man who had just described her as a political statement. She walked out of the great hall of Vathara Keep, with the Alpha King's hand no longer at her back, the council's eyes still on her neck like a held blade, and the whetstone in her vest pocket pressing cold against her ribs. He told her everything that night. Not because he was kind, he would have been the first to say so. He told her because whatever arrangement he was building required her cooperation, and he was not the sort of man who secured cooperation through deception when he could secure it through clarity. They sat in the room she'd been moved to, North Hall, East Wing, a room with actual furniture and a window that faced the inner courtyard. A fire. She sat near it because she'd been cold for 8 days and intended to be warm for the foreseeable future. He sat on the other side of it, in a chair that faced her, his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely linked. The scar through his eyebrow was more visible in firelight. She kept noticing it, which annoyed her. "The council," he said, "has been selecting my mate candidates for 3 seasons. I gathered. They've also been selecting other things." He looked at the fire. "The advisors they recommend, the border agreements they endorse, the trade negotiations they structure, the officers who guard the keep." He said it without heat. It was old information, the kind that's been handled so many times it's lost its temperature. Casson has spent 11 years building a court that runs through him. The mate selection is the last piece. If they choose my mate, they choose my heir's lineage. If they choose the lineage, they choose the heir's loyalties, she said. He looked at her. Yes. So you chose someone with no pack, no allegiance, and no bloodline they can claim, she said. Someone they can't control. Someone they can't control, he agreed. Someone whose loyalty, if it exists, would be to me rather than to any arrangement Casson has made with her family. Someone they'll spend all their energy opposing, which means they'll spend less of it on the things I actually care about. He paused. And someone low-born enough that every tradesman and farmer and common blood wolf in this territory will see their king choose her and understand that the council does not speak for me. She was quiet for a moment. The fire cracked. Outside the courtyard window, something moved. A wolf, she thought, one of the sentries making the night round, the heavy tread of a large body settling briefly into beast form. "What do you want from me?" she said. "Visibility," he said. "Show up to the council meals. Don't be invisible. Don't be managed. You don't have to pretend to like me. It would probably be less convincing if you tried." "I won't pretend to be anything," she said. "I know." He said it with something that was not quite a smile. More like a recognition. "That's why you're useful." She should have felt the sting of that. Useful, the blunt transactional word for what she was. And she did feel it, like pressing a bruise. But underneath it was something she hadn't expected. Something that felt, quietly, like relief. Because the men who had offered her things before, small things, favors, and considerations, and the particular warm attention of men who want something from a woman they consider beneath them, had never simply said so. They'd wrapped it in courtesy and let her figure out the actual price later. Tern had put the price on the table first. It was the most respectful thing anyone in this keep had done to her. She hated that she noticed. "If I'm going to do this," she said, "I want something. Name it. Information. What's happening in those council sessions. What the actual political situation is. I won't be moved around a board I can't see." He looked at her for a long moment, that almost question in the eyebrow. "All right. And I want my toolkit back. The whetstone was borrowed. I need my own." "Done." She nodded once. Looked at the fire. "Then we have an arrangement." He stood, moved toward the door, stopped. "Ilka." She looked up. "The arrowheads in the tribute crate. Did you finish them?" She hadn't. She'd only corrected 4. Not yet. "There's a workbench in the garrison room, on the 2nd level. The light's better there." He opened the door. stopped again, his back to her, and she watched the line of his shoulders in the doorway. "Thank you," he said, "for the honesty about what this is." The door closed. She sat with that for a long time. She showed up. That was the first thing they noticed about her. The council and the household staff, and the pack members who moved through the keep like water, through stone. The girl was everywhere. Not loudly. Not with the aggressive visibility of someone performing defiance. She simply appeared. Meals. Council anteroom. The garrison yard, where the soldiers drilled at dawn, and where she stood 3 mornings in a row watching with obvious assessment, her arms crossed, until a guard captain finally asked if she needed something, and she said, "Your bowmen dropped their left shoulder on release. 3 of them. It's pulling the shots right," and walked away. The captain had spent an irritated afternoon discovering she was correct. She ate in the great hall rather than the smaller rooms where visiting guests were sometimes sequestered, because no one had explicitly told her to do the latter, and so she did not. She asked questions, the correct kind, the kind that established who actually knew what in any given room. She found the keep's herbalist on her second day, and spent an hour with him not because she needed herbs, but because the herbalist was the person the cook trusted, and the cook was the person the household's staff trusted. And inside a week, she had a reasonably complete map of who in Vithara Keep actually controlled things versus who merely appeared to. It was not so different from the Thornfield Commonlands. Power was always the same shape. The people who made the noise were rarely the same ones who held the weight. Tern watched this. He said nothing about it for 6 days. On the 7th day, he found her in the garrison workroom, a long, low room on the 2nd level with good north light and pegs along the wall for tools, where she had spread the remaining tribute arrowheads on the bench and was working through them with methodical attention. The sound of the whetstone on iron was small and steady. She didn't look up when the door opened. "You've reorganized the kitchen store schedule," he said. "I suggested a modification," she said. Cook agreed. "The distribution runs twice weekly now instead of 3 times. 3 times was inefficient. The 3rd run was less than a quarter load." She angled the arrowhead against the stone. "It saves half a day of work for 2 people per week." They seemed pleased. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him cross the room, stop somewhere behind her left shoulder. The scent of him reached her before she heard the footstep. Pine and iron, and something she had started, privately, to categorize as just him, the particular warm mineral base that was his, and no one else's in the entire keep. She had noticed this about herself, this noticing of him, and she considered it with the same level neutrality she gave everything she didn't like. It was the mate pull. She knew about it in theory. Everyone did. It was not a secret how the bond worked among wolves. She was not wolf-born, but the scent receptors didn't care. She filed the sensation in the same place she filed the usefulness of a well-set arrowhead. Known quantity, present to be worked with rather than against. "The garrison captain wants to hire you," Tern said. She set the arrowhead down. "I'm not available for hire. That's what I told him." There was something in his voice she couldn't quite place. "He asked what you were available for." I didn't have an answer. She turned on the bench to look at him. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, which was, she had learned, the thing he did when he wasn't sure what to do with them. A kind of physical parenthesis, holding himself in reserve. The firelight from the corridor caught the silver in his scar. "Tell him I'm available for consultation," she said, on a case-by-case basis. His jaw moved. Not a word, not quite a smile. It was the 3rd or 4th time she'd seen that particular movement from him. The jaw going briefly tight on the left side, and she'd thought at first it was irritation. She was reclassifying it. It seemed to happen when she said something he hadn't expected, which was, she was coming to understand, fairly often. "I'll tell him." "And tell him," she said, turning back to the workbench, that his men should drill with shorter arrows in winter. The cold affects the shaft flex. They compensate wrong for it. Silence. Then, how do you know what his men do in winter? You've been here 10 days, I asked. A pause. Longer this time. Ilka. What? Are you going to help me run this keep? She ran the whetstone along the arrowhead's edge, found the angle, held it. I'm helping myself not be bored, she said. The fact that it helps you is coincidental. His jaw did the thing. She did not let herself smile until she heard the door close. 3 weeks in, the council's strategy clarified. They could not remove her. Tern had made that much clear without stating it, simply by the way the household had shifted around her presence. You could not misplace someone the king's household now accepted as fixed. So Casson, who was nothing if not adaptive, switched from removal to management. If she stayed, she would be made into what they needed. A visible symbol of the king's caprice, easily dismissed. Her presence evidence that Tern was erratic rather than strategic. Small slights. Quiet exclusions. The dinner seating that placed her beside the most junior guest, so that the distance between her and the king's end of the table could be measured by anyone paying attention. The formal occasions for which she received notification too late for proper dress, not enough to claim insult, only enough to ensure she appeared wrong for the room. She noticed. She said nothing to Tern about any of it. What she did instead was learn the machinery well enough to stop it. The third time she received a late notification. The autumn gathering feast. Word delivered 2 hours before guests arrived. She went to the keep's seamstress, a woman named Diana who was 60 years old, had surviving opinions about every dress ever made in the Eastern Territories, and who had, as it happened, a personal history with Elder Aldrich's late wife that she considered very much unresolved. They talked for 40 minutes. Ilka left wearing a gown of deep green wool that had been altered from stock in 40 minutes because Dina worked fast when she was motivated, and she arrived at the feast before the council. She sat 3 seats from Tern. Nobody had assigned her that seat. Nobody challenged her, either, because the seat had not been explicitly assigned to anyone else, and she sat in it with the specific quality of stillness that says, I have decided. And there is no argument that follows. Tern looked at her when she sat down. The candles were lit, and the green of the dress caught the light in a way she hadn't particularly planned for. And he looked at her. Not the dress, her face. For a moment too long before he looked away. Casson, at the other end of the table, watched this with great interest and no visible expression. You look deliberate, Tern said quietly, when the servers began to move. I am always deliberate, she said. Where did you get the dress? Dina. Something shifted in his face. Dina hates making quick alterations. She made an exception, Ilka said. When I told her I was trying to seat myself within 3 places of you, so that the council's seating arrangement would be visibly moot. He reached for his wine. Didn't drink it. And she cared about the council's seating arrangement because Denna, Ilka said carefully, has feelings about Elder Aldrich that are complicated and long-standing and that I am in no position to judge, only to take advantage of. He set the wine down without drinking it. His jaw, yes, there it was. You've been here 3 weeks. People talk to me, she said. I listen. It's not complicated. He turned to look at her fully then. Not the quick glances from across a room that she'd been collecting and not acknowledging. A real look, the kind that actually lands on a person rather than their utility. She felt it the way you feel a hand on your shoulder, immediate and specific and impossible to pretend otherwise. What else do you know? He said, very quiet. A great many things, she said, and turned to her meal, because the look was still on her and she needed somewhere else to put her eyes. She found out about her family on a Tuesday, which was otherwise an unremarkable day. A letter arrived, from her mother. She recognized the handwriting before she recognized anything else about it. Her mother's cramped, careful script the product of a woman who had taught herself to read and write at 35 and treated every letter like something fragile. She read it twice. Her mother wrote of a good autumn, of the bees, which had produced well, the best yield in 6 years, of the debt to the Thornfield mill, which had, unaccountably, been paid in full by an anonymous source through the Pack Registry administrative offices, of the new roof on the barn, which had been paid for the same way, of her father's health, which was better since someone had sent a physician from the Eastern District, of how they were, her mother wrote, really very well. Ilka read it twice and then set it down on the workbench and looked at the wall for a long time. She had said nothing to Tern about her family. Nothing about the debt, nothing about the barn, nothing about her father's recurring chest ailment that had gotten worse each winter for 5 years. There had been no reason to say it. It was not relevant to the arrangement, and she did not trade in personal information with people who hadn't earned it. He knew anyway. The Pack Registry administrative offices, anonymous source. She went looking for him. He was in the council map room, alone, which was rare. Usually, if he was in the map room, there was someone with him. He was standing over the long map of the Eastern Territories with 2 candles and a set of survey notes, and he looked up when she came in. She watched his face. He registered her expression with something she couldn't quite name. Not guilt, not satisfaction, something careful. Something that did not particularly want to be caught. Ilka, he said. The registry offices, she said. A pause. Not long. I didn't know about the physician until it was all ready. Don't, she said. He stopped. She stood in the doorway of the map room and felt something trying to crack open inside her chest that she very much did not want to crack open. She was 26 years old, and she had been taken care of by no one but herself since she was 16. And the particular feeling of finding out it had happened anyway. Quietly, without announcement, without expectation of gratitude, she did not have a place for that feeling. It didn't fit any category she'd built. You should have told me, she said. Her voice was steady. She had made it steady. Would you have accepted it? He said. The answer was no. He knew the answer was no. She could see it in the careful quality of his face, not triumphant, just knowing. The way you know something about a person after you've paid close attention for weeks. That's not the point, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. He set the survey notes down. I can stop. The physician's contracted for 2 seasons, but I can terminate it. The registry payment is made. That can't be undone. But if you want... I don't want you to stop, she said. Quiet. I want you to have told me, she said. He nodded. Once. I should have. She looked at him across the candlelit map of the Eastern Territories and thought, this is not the arrangement I agreed to. She didn't say it. She said nothing. She left the doorway and went back to her room, and sat by her own fire, and felt the crack in the thing she'd built around herself very carefully over years, and did not quite know what to do about the fact that it had been made by an act of kindness she hadn't asked for. The wolf found her on a Thursday. She'd gone out to the east courtyard just before dark. She liked the liminal quality of it, the light going amber and then gray, the way the keep settled into the close of day. She was the only person in the courtyard. She sat on the stone bench near the herb garden, and had been still long enough that a cat had come to investigate and gone away disappointed. The wolf came from the north gate. She heard it before she saw it, the pad of something large, careful, heavier than it was trying to be. She turned slowly. Because you turn slowly around wolves, not from fear, but because sudden movement changed the shape of a moment, and she had no interest in changing this one poorly. He was very large in beast form. She'd known that he would be. Alphas generally were, and Tern carried his size in both his forms with the same uncrowded ease. The wolf was dark, almost black in the failing light, with the crescent of silver at his left shoulder that was, she'd been told by a kitchen girl who considered it deeply romantic, the beast form echo of his scar. He moved along the courtyard wall with his nose down, and she understood, in a general way, what he was doing. What she had not expected was the hair. He dropped it in front of her feet, looked up at her. The gold brown of his eyes in wolf form was the same as in his human face, which struck her as something she should have anticipated and somehow hadn't. She looked at the hair. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. His tail moved, once. He lay down 3 feet from her feet, which was closer than a king ought to be in any form, and put his great head down on his forepaws and looked out at the darkening courtyard. She sat with him until full dark. She did not know then what she knew later. She'd learn afterward from the garrison captain, who'd told someone, who'd told the kitchen girl, who'd found it necessary to share, that the Alpha King had not been in beast form outside the training grounds in 2 years, that the wolf brought kills to people. That was the word the garrison captain used, diplomatically, that it was particular about, that it was considered, in the old language of the pack bond, a marking of territory that had nothing to do with property and everything to do with intention. She'd learn all of this later. In the courtyard, in the dark, she sat beside a wolf who was also a king and felt warm. She didn't catalog it. She didn't file it. She let it be what it was, just for the length of the evening. The hare ended up in the kitchen and was made into a very good stew. She ate 2 bowls. The midpoint arrived the way important things always do. Not as a revelation, but as the accumulation of small knowings, until one morning she woke and understood something that had been true for weeks. The council was not merely trying to control the bloodline. She'd been working with what Tern shared with her for 6 weeks. The information she'd asked for, delivered in late evenings when the keep was quiet, and he appeared at her door, sometimes with documents, and sometimes with nothing but his particular willingness to sit across from her and think out loud. She had come to understand that this was unusual, that he did not generally think out loud, that he'd told her things in those evenings that he'd told, she suspected, no one else in the keep, not from confession but from the particular pressure of a mind that holds too much and needed somewhere that wasn't the council table to put it down. She'd been assembling pieces. The trade agreements renegotiated in the past 3 years, all of them funneled through Aldrich's River territories. The officer appointments, the guard structure, the way the keep's internal communication moved through Cassin's secretary as a matter of protocol, the way the 5 mate candidates they'd prepared all had one thing in common she'd noted, and then let sit. All 5 families held hereditary debt to the pack registry office that Cassin supervised. Debt. Control. An heir whose mother's family owed Cassin everything. She brought it to him on a Thursday evening, laid it out the way you'd lay out a map. Not the conclusions, the pieces in order, and let him see the shape himself. He was very quiet for a long time. "There's a name," she said, "in the registry correspondence. A younger cousin of yours. Aldrich's family fostered him. He was removed from the succession line in your grandfather's time, but the removal was conditional. Halveth." His voice was flat. It was the first time she'd seen him look. The word she wanted was frightened, but it wasn't quite that. It was what lives just underneath frightened, in the place where a person has looked at a thing and understood it fully. "He's been in the Western Territories." "He's been in Aldrich's house," she said, silence. "They weren't trying to control my bloodline," he said. "They were planning to replace it," she said. "A pliant heir, controllable from birth, with a mother indebted to the council. Your removal would need justification, instability, incapacity, something that demonstrated you couldn't hold the pack's confidence. My mate choice is evidence of instability," he said, not a question. "You picked a commoner with no pack, no bloodline, no standing, against the unanimous recommendation of a council known for its discretion and good governance. By the time Halveth comes of age in the succession documents—" 3 months, Tern said. "That's the conditional restoration. 3 months from now." Yes. He stood up from the chair and moved to the window. Stood there, with his back to her, and she watched the tension in his shoulders work through something, the visible process of a man who has just learned the shape of a fight he'd thought was smaller than it was. They'll move before then, he said, to force the instability into the record. Or manufacture it, she said. He turned, looked at her. The fire was behind her and he was backlit by the window, and she could not read all of his expression, only the shape of it, and the shape was opened. The particular open face of a person who has been fighting alone long enough that finding an ally has temporarily suspended their defenses. She was not prepared for it. She'd been preparing for most things in this keep for 6 weeks, filing and categorizing and planning, and this she had not prepared for. The Alpha King, his strategies stripped down, looking at her across a fire-lit room like she was the only solid thing in it. They will come for you, he said. When they move, they'll use you. You're the evidence, you have to know that. I know that, she said. And I'm better evidence alive and uncooperative, she said, so I intend to remain both. His jaw did the thing, and she was not prepared for this either. Something in his face softened. Not performed softness, not the careful warmth of a man trying to manage her. Something quiet and unguarded and real. A moment of a man who has spent 11 years being managed, and who is looking at someone who refuses to be, and the expression was, she thought, something close to relief. Ilka, he said. Don't, she said, because she could hear what was in the word and she was not ready for what came after it. He closed his mouth, nodded once. All right, he said. They sat with each other in the firelight and they did not say what they meant, and she felt the shape of the unspoken thing between them like something living, warm and very present and waiting, in the way that only things that are real and inevitable manage to wait. The wolf came again on the following 2 Thursdays. The second time, he brought a brace of rabbits. She thanked him, and he lay down further away than before, which she understood was him trying to be appropriate, and which she privately found so unlikely for a king that she sat us with the absurdity of it for a long moment before she went to sit in her usual place, and he put 3 feet of stone courtyard between his head and her feet, with the dignity of a man trying very hard. The 3rd Thursday she moved, sat closer, put herself within an arm's length of him without preamble or commentary. He did not move away. She could feel the heat coming off him. Beast-form wolves ran warmer than their human shape. She knew this in theory and now felt it as fact, a warmth like a large stone that has been in sun all day. Deep and steady and radiating from a source that didn't diminish. She sat in it, did not touch him, did not look at him. He huffed once, low through his nose. She chose to interpret this as contentment and not question it. They stayed until the first bell of night watch. What the council did when they moved was this. They manufactured a letter. Not a clumsy forgery. A careful one. They had access to the registry correspondence forms, to the seals, to the administrative hand of the keep's own offices. The letter alleged, in sober and specific administrative language, that Ilka of Thornfield had entered the keep under a falsified status claim that she was under investigation for an unrelated matter involving the Thornfield Tribute Delegation's missing goods inventory, and that her mate candidacy should be suspended pending inquiry. Missing goods. She almost laughed when she saw it. The arrowheads. Of course. She'd taken 4 arrowheads from a tribute crate she'd been told to leave alone, and in the hands of a careful administrator with access to the supply manifests, 4 arrowheads became evidence of systematic misappropriation. The charge was ludicrous. It was also, in its technical construction, impeccable. It came through official channels on a market day morning when the keep was full of people, and any response from Turn would be witnessed and entered into the record. She read it at breakfast, set it down, finished her tea, thought about it. Turn found her an hour later in the garrison workroom, the arrowheads laid out in front of her, her hands still. You've seen it, he said. I have. She turned the letter over in her fingers. It's well done. It's a lie. Of course it is. But lies told in official language are harder to dismiss than the truth told informally. You know that. She set the letter on the bench. If you respond formally to deny it, you're on record defending a woman charged with theft. If you don't respond, you're on record ignoring a legitimate inquiry. Either way, they've put you in a position. I can refute the inventory claim, he said. The supply manifest is verifiable. How long does verification take? A pause. Weeks. 3 months, she said, until Halveth's conditional succession is active. He was standing in the door of the workroom with his arms crossed and his face doing something she'd come to know. The internal movement of a man whose mind is moving faster than he's showing. The scar through his eyebrow, the jaw that told her when he'd arrived at something he didn't like. There's another option, he said. She looked at him. I could formalize your position, he said, before the inquiry. Take the mate candidacy off the table entirely and something more permanent. He said the last 2 words carefully, which would make the pending charge a matter of the king's household rather than a registry inquiry, and would redirect the council's legal standing from inquiry to challenge. She understood what he was offering. She understood the full shape of it. That's not a political move, she said. He held very still. No, that's not you using me. That's something else. Yes, he said. She looked at the arrowheads on the bench in front of her, the ones she'd filed for distance, the angle corrected, the weight adjusted, the small matter of a thing made right because it was wrong and she had the skill to fix it. I need to think, she said. I know. I don't know if She stopped, tried again. I'm not good at being taken care of, she said. I've already told you that, basically. You haven't told me that specifically, he said, but I'd gathered. She looked up at him. He was watching her with that open face, the one she'd seen by the window when she'd laid out the council's scheme. Unguarded, present, not performing anything. I trust your cruelty more than your kindness, she said. It came out more honest than she'd intended. I know where I am with cruelty. Kindness has conditions. I've never found one that didn't. He was quiet for a long moment. I know, he said. The arrangement I offered you the first night was cruelty. It was clear. It was honest. He uncrossed his arms. This isn't that. I can't make this clear for you. I don't know what it is exactly. I know what it isn't. What isn't it? He looked at her directly. It isn't political. Her chest did something complicated. She breathed through it. Give me until tonight, she said. He left. She sat with the arrowheads and the not quite answer he'd given her, and she thought about her mother's careful handwriting, about a barn roof and a physician, about a wolf lying on cold stone to give her warmth, without asking anything in return. About cruelty that announces itself in kindness that doesn't explain itself, and the fact that she had spent 26 years knowing the difference. She knew the difference. She said yes. Not that evening. He came to find her after dark, and she was already in the map room, sitting in the chair beside the long eastern map, and when he opened the door, she said yes before he could ask, which made him stop in the doorway with his hand still on the latch. Yes, she said again. Not because of the council, not because of the charge, because... She stopped. Because I've been paying attention. And I think you mean what you say, and I've never been able to say that about anyone. She said it without looking at him, which was the only way she could say it without her voice doing something she'd regret. He crossed the room, stood beside her chair, didn't touch her. I mean what I say, he said. I know. She looked up at him. I'm aware that I'm still afraid. You'd be stupid not to be. I'm not stupid. No, he said. You're not. He crouched down to her level, the same way he'd crouched to look at the arrowheads on the pallet the first day, and at this proximity the warmth of him was something she felt in her sternum and her jaw and the backs of her hands. Ilka. I went into this arrangement knowing what I wanted from it, strategically, and somewhere in the past 6 weeks, he stopped, his jaw moved, not the small tick. Something larger, something working. I lost track of the strategy. She looked at him. When did you lose track? She said. He considered it seriously. The feast, he said. The green dress. When I looked at you and I wasn't thinking about Casson. She breathed. And after that, he said, it got worse, she said. I didn't know how to. I don't have a model for this, he said, with the honest bluntness of a man who has run out of diplomatic language and switched to the real thing. I've been a king for 9 years. I know how to want something strategically. I don't know how to want something that has nothing to do with strategy and cannot be contained within it. The fire in the map room was low. The candles were burning down. Outside, the night watch moved somewhere below the window, the crunch of boots on frost. I'm still afraid, she said, again. I know. He hadn't moved from his crouch beside her chair. I'm not asking you not to be. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put her hand out very carefully and touched the scar through his eyebrow with 2 fingers. Light. Quick. The way you'd touch something to confirm it was real. He closed his eyes. She took her hand back. All right, she said. He opened his eyes. He did not stand up immediately. He stayed crouched at her level, looking at her, and she could see the thing in his face that he wasn't saying, that he'd spent 6 weeks not saying, and she understood, with the clarity of a woman who had been paying attention to everything, that it was not going to be easily said and did not need to be tonight. All right, she said again. The council moved on the 3rd morning. Casson called the formal session himself, his right under the Articles, to convene in the king's absence, which Tern had anticipated and had not been absent for. He arrived before Casson. He sat at the head of the table. Ilka sat beside him, 3 chairs down, which was by that point a thing the council could object to, and didn't, because she had made that seat hers by repetition, and they knew it. Casson laid out the charge against her with great and measured clarity. The manifest discrepancy, the pending inquiry, the articles regarding mate candidacy status during investigation. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. It was one of the things she had come to understand about him. That his control was itself the weapon, the absolute unshakable quality of his composure, a demonstration that he expected to win because he had always expected to win. My king, Casson concluded, the articles of succession require. I'm aware of what they require, Tern said. I've also reviewed the manifest in question. The review process takes. I completed it last night. Tern's voice was even. He placed a document on the table. Her toolkit inventory, her own hand in the margins, the date she'd borrowed the whetstone from the kitchen boy, the date she'd been moved from the storage room to the North Hall, the 4 arrowheads in question identified, corrected, and returned to the supply crate 2 weeks prior. The manifest discrepancy is a recording lag. The arrowheads in question were corrected and returned. You'll find them in the supply room, 3rd shelf, with Ilka's notation on the weight. Casson looked at the document. His composure did not change. There is also, Tern said, the matter of the letter's timing. He placed a second document beside the first. A formal inquiry convened during a market day morning, when the keep's public record would capture any response. Coordinated with the supply manifest review, which would normally take weeks. He paused. Convenient timing for an inconvenient inquiry. Aldrich stirred. My king, the timing of an administrative. I also want, Tern said, to discuss Halveth. The temperature in the room changed. Casson's composure held. Barely. She could see it. The smallest adjustment in his posture, the almost imperceptible shift of a man recalibrating. He had not expected the name to be there. He had been very careful about Halveth, not careful enough. My cousin, Tern said, who has been resident in Lord Aldrich's household for 3 seasons, whose conditional succession clause activates in 67 days, whose placement there was arranged through the same administrative process that prepared the mate candidacy list, and whose candidacy paperwork, I have a copy here, was pre-filled. He placed the third document on the table. The council was very still. The charge against Ilka, Tern said, will be withdrawn. The mate candidacy process will be concluded, and the council will provide me, within the week, with a full accounting of every arrangement made in my name through administrative channels over the past 3 years. He looked along the table, slow, deliberate, all of them. Kassan looked back at him. Kassan looked at Ilka. She met his gaze. She said nothing she did not need to. Of course, Kassan said. His voice was the same. Everything about him was the same, and yet something beneath it was different. The way still water is different when you know the stone has already sunk. The council is delighted to cooperate fully. The formal session ended 3 hours later. She was in the North Hall corridor when she heard the footstep behind her. Quick, deliberate, not Tern's measured weight. She turned. Kassan stood alone in the corridor. He had, she thought, followed her from the council wing rather than the hall entrance. A choice. He had made a choice about this encounter. Ilka of Thornfield, he said. She stopped. Elder. He studied her. He was, she thought, genuinely looking, not performing the look, not using it as a weapon, just looking with the eyes of an old man who has played a game for 40 years and has just met someone who beat him and wants to understand how. You are not what I expected. I know, she said. What he finds in you, Kassan said. I understand better than I did. You're not manageable. He said it without heat. An observation. I spent a long time looking for the lever. I didn't find one. There isn't one, she said. No. He was quiet for a moment. I want you to know something. What we planned, Halveth, the succession. It was not intended to harm him. We believed, I believed, that Tern was not suited to hold the pack without structure. He has structure, she said. It's just not yours. Something in Kassan's face shifted. Not quite admission. Close to it. What do you intend to do? He said. She looked at him. This old man who had spent 40 years being the shape of this kingdom's power, who had believed, maybe truly believed, that what he was building was for the pack's good. She thought about the long shadow of him, how many decisions had run through him, how much had been shaped by his hand. That depends, she said, on what Tern decides. She paused. But I'll tell you what I think. I think a man who spent 11 years managing a king is probably very tired. I think you wanted to control things because you didn't trust them to hold without you. I think that's not. She stopped. Tried again. I think there are other ways to serve a king than deciding what he needs. Kassan looked at her for a long time. You are, he said quietly, rather formidable. I file my own arrowheads, she said. I've always found it easier to do things properly myself. He walked away. She watched him go. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired and clear, and the kind of steady that comes after a thing has been settled. She asked Tern not to execute Kassan. This was not, she recognized, the obvious request from a woman who had been the target of a manufactured criminal charge and a succession plot. Tern looked at her when she said it with the specific expression of a man who has been handed something he was not holding. He's not, Tern started. I know he's not going to be executed. That's not the tradition anymore. She sat across from him in the map room, the same chairs they'd been in 100 times now, the fire lower than usual. I mean dismissal. I mean public dismantling. The kind that follows a man into history. He tried to replace me. I know what he tried. She was quiet for a moment. I also know that he built this keep's administrative structure for 40 years, and that most of it works, and that he did it because he believed he was holding it together. He was wrong about how. He wasn't wrong about the needing to hold. She looked at Tern. He told me something in the corridor after the session. He said he believed you weren't suited to hold the pack without structure. He's wrong. He is. But he's not wrong that you haven't let people help you. She said it carefully. The council was a kind of help, a bad kind. But there was something real underneath it. She looked at her hands. I think if you dismantle him publicly, you lose whatever that thing was. The institutional knowledge. The people who trusted him. Tern looked at her for a long time. What do you want me to do? Let him resign, she said, with dignity. Let Aldrich face the full accounting. That's different. Aldrich was purely self-serving. But Casson, let him finish. Quietly. And if he tries again? He won't, she said. And then, because she believed it, he saw you hold the council session this morning. He saw the documents. He knows you've been paying attention this whole time. What he thought you needed managing because you were careless. He found out you weren't. She paused. He's old, and he's tired, and I think he would rather spend what time he has left being an elder of a pack in good order than a disgraced man. Tern was quiet. His jaw moved, the small, tight movement on the left side. She had the full lexicon for it now. She knew this particular one, the one that said he'd heard her and he didn't like it and he was going to agree anyway. All right, he said. All right, she said. He stood and moved to the window. She watched him stand there, the familiar shape of his back, the shoulders that held the weight of this keep, and had held it alone long enough that the habit was built into the structure of him. You're going to make everything complicated, he said. I already have, she said. You chose me for it. I chose you to annoy the council, he said. And it worked, she said. He turned. The low fire and the window light caught the scar at his eyebrow, the line of him she'd memorized without deciding to. It worked, he agreed, and a number of things I didn't plan. She looked back at him, didn't look away. He crossed the room, stopped when he was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. That deep, steady warmth, the wolf running warm beneath the man. He looked at her with the open face, the unguarded face, and she let herself look back. Ilka, he said. I know, she said. He breathed. I haven't said anything. I know what you're going to say, she said. Tell me then. She thought about it for a moment, the shape of what she knew. The arrowheads, the wolf in the courtyard, her mother's careful handwriting, the green dress. The first night in the storage room, the whetstone cold in her hand, and a man who had crouched in the dust to look at her work and called it by what it was. You're going to say, she said slowly, that this started as a strategy and stopped being one, and that you don't know what to do about that because you've only known how to want things strategically, and that you're fairly sure, that what you feel now has nothing to do with strategy, and She stopped. You're asking me if it's mutual. The room was very still. Is it? He said. She stood up. She was shorter than him by a head, and she looked at him directly anyway, the way she'd looked at him across the council table, and across the firelit map room, and in the courtyard dark. You paid a physician for my father, she said, without telling me, without needing me to thank you. She paused. And I've been afraid of kindness my whole life because I'd never seen it without a condition, and you... Her voice did the thing she hadn't wanted it to do. She steadied it. You didn't put a condition on it. He reached out. His hand found her jaw. Careful. A question in the touch. She let herself lean into it. Just slightly, the weight of her cheek in his palm. Yes, she said. It's mutual. He kissed her, soft and long, and with the patience of a man who had been waiting without permission to be impatient. And she felt the warmth of him from her jaw to her feet, and the last of the wall she'd built. Carefully, over years, with good reason, came down. Not dramatically, not all at once. More the way ice melts, from the edge inward, slowly and then completely. The keep settled. It didn't happen fast. Nothing in a kingdom happens fast, or if it does, the speed is usually an emergency. The good things happen slowly, the gradual redistribution of administrative authority as Casson's systems were reviewed and reassigned. The quiet resignation of Elder Aldrich, under the weight of the accounting that revealed 6 years of territory self-dealing, the slow rebalancing of a council that had been a closed fist and was now becoming something more like an open hand. Halveth, the potential heir, was left alone. He was, as it turned out, a quiet young man who kept horses in the Western Territory and had no particular ambition, had been used as a chess piece himself, without full knowledge of the game. Turn received him once, let him speak, settled a reasonable income on him, and sent him back to his horses. The quiet justice of it was the kind that didn't make a story, which meant it was almost certainly the right kind. There was a formal ceremony. She'd asked to skip it, and Turn had overruled her. The first time he'd overruled her and meant it. His jaw set in a way that told her he wasn't budging, and she'd recognized that face well enough to know when to stop. She wore a dress that Denna made for the occasion, with 3 weeks' notice and considerable creative satisfaction, deep amber, and the pack assembled in the hall, and Turn's hand was warm at the small of her back, and the words were said that needed saying. The pack's reaction was, to her, the most honest thing about it. Not the council families, who had arranged their faces into careful approval. The common blood wolves, the garrison soldiers, the kitchen staff, who had been feeding her for months and watching, they were the ones who made noise when the ceremony ended. Genuine noise, the unmanaged kind. Someone in the back of the hall howled, which in the old tradition was a sound for true bonds only, and it was picked up until the hall rang with it. She stood in it and felt something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that required more time to become a word. The winter settled in around them the way winter does in high-walled keeps, with the sound of wind finding the gaps in the stone, with the smell of wood smoke thick and close, with the particular intimate smallness that comes when the world outside is cold and the world inside is warm. She learned the keep's winter patterns the same way she'd learned everything else, by paying attention, and she learned Turn's winter patterns alongside them, which was a different education. He slept badly in winter. He worked too late. He had a lifelong habit of skipping the midday meal when he was occupied, and would fail to notice until she appeared in the doorway of whichever room he'd occupied for 6 hours, and the look on her face reminded him that he was, despite the weight he carried, still a body with requirements. She became the person who noticed. She didn't make a ceremony of it. She simply noticed and corrected for it, the way you correct a bad bevel angle. Not with commentary, just with the practical application of what was needed. Food appeared. The fire in his study was built up without a word. The correspondence he'd been avoiding because it was the tedious kind, trade permits, grazing disputes. The particular diplomatic phrasing required for letters to packs that had complicated histories with Vithara. She began drafting, not for him to sign without reading, but for him to read faster. He didn't thank her. She didn't want him to. She was learning what she wanted, slowly, the way the learning happens when you've spent years not knowing what to want. She wanted to be useful in ways that were hers, not in the ways that had been assigned to her, and there was a difference, and she was coming to know the feel of it. What she wanted was to be here. That was, finally, the word. Here. In this keep that had been cold when she arrived and was warm now, at least in the specific square footage that she'd made warm by occupying it. Here with a man who had been, by his own description, a strategy that had changed shape on him, and who showed it in the ways she'd learned to read. The jaw that told her when she'd won an argument she shouldn't have been able to win. The way he appeared in the garrison workroom sometimes, without purpose, and stood nearby, present, until she found an excuse to keep him there a little longer. The wolf that still came on Thursday evenings, heavy and warm, lying close in the courtyard dark. One Thursday evening she sat with him and thought, I brought nothing to this keep. I arrived with 4 things and a borrowed whetstone. I had no bloodline, no alliance, no strategic value to anyone, and she had become the reason the thing was still standing. She sat with that thought until it settled, until it was not frightening, until it was true and hers and enough. The arrowheads were finished before winter proper. All of them. The tribute crate fully corrected, plus 3 crates from the garrison supply that the bow captain had brought her with an air of studied casualness that suggested he had been trying to work up to asking for weeks. She set up properly in the garrison workroom, her tools laid out in the order she preferred: whetstone, backing leather, measuring cord, the small brass gauge her father had given her when she was 12, and which had survived everything. She was working on a cold afternoon in early winter when Tern appeared in the doorway and leaned against the frame and said nothing, which was a thing he did when he had something to say and hadn't found the form for it yet. She kept working. "The Eastern Border Captain sent a report," he said eventually. "What does it say?" 3 rogue packs in the southeastern territories. "Nothing Vathara can't handle, but it'll want attention in spring." A pause. He also included an aside about the arrow supply he received last month. She ran the stone along an edge. "What about it?" He said, and I'm quoting, "Whoever corrected the bevel on these, tell them I want them on my team." She set the arrowhead down. "He can't have me, I know." She heard the sound of him settling into the room, not quite entering, still in the doorway, but present. "I wrote back and told him the asset in question was not available for secondment." "Asset," she said. I used formal language. "You called me an asset in an official correspondence." "In official correspondence," he said, with the patience of a man who has learned to hold his ground against a woman who will find the exact weakness in any position he takes, "there are specific terms for asset," she said. His jaw moved. "Ilka." "Yes?" "I told him you were the Alpha Queen and unavailable." He said it with the particular quality of a man who knows he's lost the framing and is skipping to the end. "I may have also said that if he needed arrow correction, he was welcome to send his supply to Vathara under the same arrangement we use for the other border packs, and that the quality of the work would suggest to him why I might be biased in my assessment." She set the whetstone down, turned to look at him. He was in the doorway, his arms crossed, his scar catching the north light, his expression doing the complex thing it did when he was trying to be very still and wasn't quite managing. He was, she thought, embarrassed, in the specific way of a man who has said something true in front of the person it's about and has no strategy for that. "You bragged about me," she said. "In a professional capacity, in official correspondence to a border captain." She looked at him. "You bragged about me." His arms uncrossed, he put his hands in his pockets. He looked at the wall beside her head, possibly. She breathed. She felt the thing that rose in her chest, warm, unwieldy, too large for what she'd planned to be, and she let it be there. She didn't categorize it. She didn't file it. She let it be what it was. She picked up the whetstone, turned back to the bench. "Tell him the service is available from the first thaw," she said. "Standard tribute rate for supply correction. Arrow weight adjustments cost extra." Silence from the doorway. Then, "Done. And tell him," she said, not looking up, "that the Alpha Queen says his bowman should try a steeper release angle in the cold months. The Eastern Territories run wetter than Vathara in winter, and it affects the knock." Another silence. A different quality to this one. "I'll tell him," Tern said. His voice had something in it she'd heard before. In the map room, in the courtyard, in the late evenings when the keep was quiet, and they'd run out of political conversation and moved into the territory just beneath it. She heard him come into the room fully, felt the warmth of him at her back before his hands settled on her shoulders, light, and he bent his head to hers. "Ilka," he said. I'm going to say something." "I know," she said. "Let me say it anyway." She set the whetstone down, turned on the bench so she was facing him, looking up at him in the north light of the garrison workroom, her hands in her lap, the arrowheads lined up behind her like a small, precise army. "Say it then." He looked at her. The scar through his eyebrow. The jaw that had betrayed him, it turned out, every time she'd done something unexpected, which was often which she planned to keep being. His hands moved from her shoulders to her face, careful, the way he was always careful with her, as though she was a thing that might choose to leave at any moment, and he was building the case for staying without making the case out loud. "I bought you to spite a council," he said, "and I lost track of the spite somewhere around the 3rd week, and I am, the jaw doing the thing. I am not good at this. I know," she said. "I am trying to tell you." "I know what you're trying to tell me," she said. "Turn." She said his name bare, no title, the way she'd been saying it for months in the intimacy of rooms that weren't public. "I know." "Tell me," he said, like she'd told him, in the map room, months ago. She thought about what she knew. About a man who had bought her to win a fight and had lost the fight to her instead, inch by inch, arrowhead by arrowhead, Thursday evening by Thursday evening, about the specific vulnerability of a powerful thing deciding to be careful with something fragile, about the wall she'd built and the edge of his kindness that had worn against it until it came down. "You meant to use me," she said, "and somewhere you stopped, and now you want me to know that." She held his gaze. "And I'm telling you that I know, and that her voice, she steadied it, that I don't want to be anywhere else, that this keep, this cold, complicated, politically unrestful keep has become the place I live, that you," she stopped, "that you are the reason I stayed past the arrangement." He was very still. "Past the arrangement," he said. "I would have left," she said. "At some point, when it was over, I had a plan to leave." She breathed, "And I kept not leaving." "Because of the arrowheads," he said. "Because of the arrowheads," she agreed. He bent his head, pressed his mouth to her hair. Just that, held there, his lips at her temple, his hands warm and still on her face. She closed her eyes. The garrison workroom smelled of iron and wet stone dust, and the particular pine and metal of him, and outside the window the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, small and quiet, the kind that didn't announce itself. Later, much later, when the winter had come and settled, and the keep had changed its rhythm around them, she sat by the fire in their rooms with a cloth on her knee and the brass gauge in her hand, checking arrow weights by feel, a habit from childhood she'd never been able to break. The fire had been going for hours. The room was warm with the dense warmth of a stone room that has been properly heated, the kind that sits in the walls and holds. Outside, snow on the sill. Turn was at the desk behind her. She could hear him with the correspondence, the rustle of it, the occasional sound of the quill, the slight exhale he made when a letter required more political delicacy than he had patience for. She'd learned his sounds. She'd learned them the way she'd learned the keep. By paying attention, which was not something she'd done on purpose. It had simply happened the way things happen when you are present in a place long enough. "The Western Council representative is asking," he said, "whether the corrected tribute arrows will be available for spring." "Yes," she said. She tested an arrowhead between her fingers. Weight was good. "Tell him yes, and add a half measure to the rate for late booking." She heard the quill stop. A pause. "You're going to be impossible to negotiate with. You knew that when you chose me." The quill resumed. She set the arrowhead with the others and picked up the next one. Ran her thumb across the bevel. The angle was wrong. Overcorrected. She picked up the whetstone. The fire cracked. Outside, wind shifted against the stone. Somewhere in the keep's lower halls, a night watch bell rang twice, which was the all clear, nothing to worry about, and she felt the sound settle in her chest the way familiar sounds settle when they've become yours. Not background noise. Acknowledgement. The rhythm of a place that belonged to her. She filed the arrowhead until the angle was right. Then she set it down and let her hands rest in her lap and looked at the fire and thought. Not with words, but with the wordless weight of a thing fully known. About what she had not planned and could not have planned and would not now trade for any plan she'd ever made. The fire burned. The snow fell outside. Behind her, the quill moved across paper in the hand of a man who had bought her to win an argument and had lost something much larger in the process, and had not, she suspected, any regret about it at all. Her brass gauge caught the firelight. She had arrived here with 4 things and a borrowed whetstone. She had not planned to stay. She had not planned any of this. Not the council, not the wolf in the courtyard. Not the physician her father didn't know to thank. Not the green dress. Not the map room in the low firelight. Not the way a powerful man's hands could be gentle when they were trying. She had planned to be nobody's. And she was still nobody's, not in the way she'd feared, not the owned kind, not the managed kind. She was her own, fully and finally, and she was also, against every plan she'd ever made, and in the best possible way, his. The arrowhead was right. The angle was correct. The weight was good. She picked up the next one. The fire burned. The keep was quiet, and it was, against all plans and arrangements and transactional honesty and spite and strategies that changed shape on their makers. It was, simply and entirely, home. Thank you for spending this time with Ilka and Tern. If their story stayed with you, the keep's firelight, the courtyard dark, the weight of a brass gauge warm in cold hands, come back and find us again. There are more worlds here, more wolves and kings and women who refuse to be pawns, and we will tell every one of them together. We will be here. So will the fire.